eventually the landlord, right, of the facility in which Chris and Ed Shin ran their business gets involved because they're overdue on rent. They've moved out. Like Ed Shin pulled the business and relocated it, but he's in arrears on his old rent, which is irritating to that landlord, which is also another pivotal moment here.
Right. So they basically skipped out. So they've got a year lease, and 9 months later, soon after Chris left for this trip, supposedly, Ed packed up the business and moved to a different location and stiffed the landlord for many months' rent. So the landlord, actually, one of the other tenants is a private investigator named Joe DeLue, who's a former officer at Laguna Beach Police, and he makes his living as a PI. So the landlord is essentially complaining to him one day about this tenant, and he's got this big empty office space and doesn't know where the guy is, and would Joe be willing to help track him down? And Joe, of course, was happy to do it, and he starts poking around, and he went, and one of the first things he did is he went and he talked to the dad, and he got these emails between him and Chris, and he looked at the question about the boat and the lake, and that he saw the answer, that it was just that he just answered with the lake, and that struck him as being very odd. So he decided to actually go in and ask for permission to enter the business, and it's been abandoned. Okay, so there's no reasonable expectation of privacy if you rent a business from somebody, or you rent a home, and you abandon it. The landlord has a right to go back inside. So Joe DeLue walks in, and very soon after making entry, he sees what appears to be blood on a light switch, and he realizes that's something that he doesn't want to mess around. So he backs out and calls the sheriff's department. Now, meanwhile, what has happened is I've got my jurisdiction covered Laguna Beach. The family had filed a missing persons report with Laguna, and they brought Ed in, and this thing's on video, Megyn, and I'm telling you, I was a DA for 26 years. You see this interview, it is fascinating because Ed Shin is so convincing. And these two detectives sit down and they're like, hey, family is trying to find their son. What's the deal? And he is almost perfect. He is calm. He is like, he doesn't break a sweat. He describes how that, Chris was always talking about this round the world trip, and he's sitting on a beach someplace. And about halfway through the interview, I'll leave the names of the detectives out. You can just see they relax and they buy it. They believe him. And, it becomes, sort of that was kind of the end, right? I taught a class at the Sheriff's Academy for young detectives. And right about the same time, I finish the class, I'm walking out to the parking lot, and I almost get tackled by this very young detective from Laguna Beach named Julia Bowman, who says, I really want to talk to you about this. I'm going to get in trouble if my boss finds out that I've cornered you, but there's something that's all wrong here. And this makes no sense. And I've looked into it, and they believe him, and I don't. And I actually got sunburned. And like you, I'm Irish, right? I think Irish background for you. So you know what that
means.
You
can't be outside unprotected.
Oh my God. So she corners me next to my car, and I went up talking to her for about 45 minutes, and I got the worst sunburn because it was so compelling. And this is my patch. This is my jurisdiction. And that was my job, was to try to help police figure this out. But Laguna officially hadn't come to me with an issue. So I've got this junior detective putting this on my radar, and I start looking into it, and I find out right about the same time. So San Juan Capistrano is where the business was. So Joe DeLue has just gone in. That was my colleague Brahim Beitai had that section. So I sit down with Brahim, and we have a meeting with Laguna and the sheriff's department. Laguna has almost no murders, but the sheriffs are Orange County sheriffs are one of the most professional homicide investigative groups in the country. They deal with enough of them. They're real pros. So we all sit down and we decide, I'm going to prosecute, or I'm going to help in the investigation if there's anything ever filed. They are going to handle the investigative part. And we start putting the pieces together. And one of the first things we learn is there was another junket out to Vegas, and Paul, who is now really worried about his brother, he's still working for the company. And they go out and they are in this casino. They were staying at almost everything was at the Wynn or the Encore. So two of the nicest hotels in Las Vegas. And that's where they would do these business junkets. And there's a world known as atmosphere modeling. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. There's a great episode in the show Silicon Valley. I think it's either the first or the second episode where they go to a toga party that's thrown by this billionaire, this like tech billionaire, and they encounter atmosphere models. And basically what it is you can hire beautiful women to come to your party and talk to all the guys that are socially awkward that you want to have invest or whatever. And they can, make your company look super bitchin' and awesome and all that. And and Paul looks over and they've got atmosphere models, and there across the room at the business junket for 1-800-EXCHANGE is Tiffany Taylor. And he makes a beeline for her and he's like, hey, aren't you supposed to be traveling the world with my brother? And she looks at him and says, I'm really sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And that's when the bottom fell out for Paul Smith and also for the family, because he knows at that point. Meanwhile, Ed is going, no, dude, it's a different Tiffany Taylor. And he's going, this is the woman in the photo that I got from my brother. And she is, her real name is not Tiffany Taylor. Her real name is Summer Hansen. She was at Playboy Centerfold, and she wound up being kind of a hero in this case in a lot of ways. And she's stunning. And Paul is in this, in this casino. His brother's gone, and at that moment, he knew that something horrible had happened. So,
oh my gosh! So let me just jump back. So because we pulled some sound bites from some of the. I've listened to the 2020 and the Dateline, a bunch of stories on this too, just over the years. But this is a piece from NBC Dateline for the moment that the cops went over to that old office, and at the same time, just about that Paul was finding out there's no Tiffany Taylor. They were finding disturbing things inside the office along the lines of what you described. Here it is in SOT 2.
Sergeants Don Vogt and Ray Wirt, Orange County Sheriff's Department. First thing to do, send some techs over to take a good close look around the old 800-EXCHANGE office. That's when they started finding more suspicious spots. On some ceiling tiles, behind some molding. They pulled up carpet and found dark-colored stains on the concrete underneath. The spots tested positive for human blood.
We confirmed that all the blood in the crime scene was in fact Chris Smith's.
All of it?
All of it.
Nobody else was bleeding in there at all?
In the end, it was all from one person, and it was one person's DNA.
And my understanding is they used luminol on the carpet, and it lit up like a Christmas tree, which detects the presence of blood.
Right. So now all of a sudden, we've gone from a missing person and kind of a mystery to we've clearly got evidence of a homicide. And that little clip that you just showed, that tiny little droplet on the strip, that's called cast off. So in the world of forensic science, when you have blood drops on a ceiling, it means that somebody has either been stabbed multiple times or beaten with a blunt object. And when they fling it back, whether it's a knife or a bat, it tends to fling viscous blood. And there was blood on the strips on the ceiling. So this was helter skelter. And at that point we knew. And right about the same time, we're also learning that Ed's, Mr. Bible study guy, he was spending hours at the tables in Vegas. And we start interviewing employees that are telling us that Ed would gamble all night long with purple chips, which are $500 chips. And then we find out that he's spending so much money that he's getting comped the presidential suite at the Encore Hotel, which is just to give you an idea, it is a 2-story hotel suite with an elevator on the inside and 24-hour butler service. It's maybe one of the nicest physical spaces in the entire world. And it is, they're flying him out from Orange County on the Encore jet to go to Vegas. And
this is not a good sign.
No. So when we get back with Ernesto Aldevar, the attorney, it became pretty clear that the pressure that Chris was putting on Ed created a huge financial motive here because, Ed's married. Chris is about to get engaged. They're not dating each other's girlfriends or wives. There's no, they're not neighbors with a dispute over a fence. They have literally no beef with each other other than money. And if Ed does not come up with $700,000 within 5 months, he literally goes to state prison, and he doesn't get a hearing.
Why can't he do that if they've made $12 million in their first year and Ed owns it 55%?
It's Viva Las Vegas. Because when you're a degenerate gambler, he literally blew probably $10 million on the tables of the Encore and Wynn hotels in Las Vegas. That's how you get a presidential suite comp to you. That's how you get the casino jet, because you are a high roller. I'm sure you've seen Casino. It's one of my favorite movies. They talk about a whale, and they have that scene where they want to get him back into the casino to go lose his money at the tables. That basically was Ed Shin. He was gambling Chris's money. And as soon as he opens up the books, he knows that Chris is gonna bring some sort of court order so that Ed, his accounts are frozen, and he's going to go to state prison. So
that makes sense. Honestly, I don't do a lot of gambling, but I know some people who do. And one of them was telling me, you know what they call people with a gambling problem? Losers. He said the ones who go out there and just win because they go out there so infrequently, they don't have a problem. It's the people who go there all the time and they lose invariably because the odds are against them. Those are the people who have a gambling problem.
Right. Yeah. Vegas and all the glitz. I mean, I'm sure most of your viewers have been there. I mean, that was not built on winning nights by amateur gamblers. Yeah, so that's from people losing money. And
I can't imagine that, Matt. Like if my husband ever said to me, the Encore Hotel is going to fly us out there on their private jet and we're staying in the presidential suite because of what happened the last time I was there, I demand a forensic accounting of every account we have. I mean, it would be horrifying.
And it gets worse than that too, because then we interview, Ed basically hired a gopher, like a personal assistant, who he moved into Chris's apartment that was being paid for by the company. And watching that clip, I got to tell you, I left the office 5 years ago. I love those guys. Don and Ray are just, I miss them almost every day. They're such good detectives. And you just see that steely-eyed, with all the crap that the police get today, the vast majority of police officers, in my experience, are really hardworking, honest guys. And Ray and Don, putting this together with them, it's like it was amazing watching those guys work. So they go to Chris's apartment and they find this dude, Kenny Kraft, living there, who's Ed's personal assistant, and they get he's driving around in Chris's Range Rover. And for me, the moment as this is all coming together, I think this was even before we got the blood. I can't remember the exact sequence, but for me, the absolute alarm bell went off when they got into Chris's apartment, and he had 2 surfboards that were there, 2 custom-made surfboards. Oh. And any surfer knows that if you're taking a surf trip anywhere, you're not leaving your boards behind. So then they did a forensic workup of the Range Rover, and they found blood in the back of the Range Rover. So that was clearly used to transport. Boy. So we then get into Ed's phones, and we find out that a couple of nights after Chris went missing, Ed's phone is pinging at this place called Desert Hot Springs, which is a tiny little dot on a map just north of the Mexican border on the way to Calexico and Mexicali. So this is East County, San Diego, middle of nowhere, right? And as a general rule, when you work homicides in Southern California, if you get a human body out into the Pacific Ocean, or you get a human body out into the desert, that body will not be found. If you throw a body in a lake, it's popping up. But if you throw a body in the ocean, or you get somebody out into the desert, it's gone. And so we have one cell phone tower, and it's got I think it's a 120-mile radius of desert land. And Ed pinged off that at 3 a.m. after renting a truck at U-Haul or something. And he drives off into the desert in the middle of the night in a pickup truck. And so we know where Chris's body is.
Credit card rewards like cash back can empower families with extra savings while they deal with the rising price of groceries and gas. But our sponsor, the Electronic Payments Coalition, says some DC politicians are partnering with corporate megastores to take the cash back rewards away from families during skyrocketing inflation. Specifically, they say the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would take billions from American families, lining corporate pockets instead. Learn more at electronicpaymentscoalition.org and see for yourself if you want to protect credit card rewards and tell DC politicians to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. That's electronicpaymentscoalition.org. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.